Good afternoon, everyone. This is the August 9th, 2024 meeting of the Science and Data Subcommittee of the Vermont Climate Council. My name is Jared Duval. I serve as co-chair of this subcommittee alongside with Colin Smythe. And we are lucky to be joined today by a very talented facilitator, Catherine Morris from CBI, who's going to be working with us through the agenda and including the work, especially the work planning session. So if it's all right, I might just pass it over to you, Catherine.
Sure. So I'm sitting in for David Plum, who would normally be here, but he's in somewhere very far away in Maine, I believe, and enjoying his vacation. So I have been working with Colin and Jared on the agenda over the last couple of days, and we've sort of planned out. I think you all got it yesterday. I can share my screen if that's helpful, just to give you an idea of where we're going. So, oops, did I give you the right thing or is that my notes? What are you seeing?
Seeing your notes, I think.
Okay.
Oh,
Probably. Let me try that again. There it is. Now I should be seeing the right thing. So we're going to talk briefly about the draft public engagement best practices. This is mostly for your information. Unless you have some questions, we'll probably have to refer those off to the authors, but I think this is fairly close to final version. And we're going to go back and talk again about the social cost of greenhouse gas recommendations and the changes that were made based on your input from the last meeting. And then the rest of the time, we really want to focus on a work plan that sort of thinks about what the Science and Data Committee has ahead of it leading up to the updated CAP, and where needed, what kinds of subgroups you might need or task groups you might need to stay on top of things. So we have a spreadsheet to share with you, and we'll walk through that. So that's and at the end, we're just going to review some resource list that is in the making and get your input on how we might structure that, or hear some advice on if you have any advice or help you want to offer. We'll welcome that. With that, I think, Jared, can I just ask for approval of the minutes, or is that your job?
feel free to do that. Would just note that, just a reminder, last meeting, the previous meeting's minutes weren't available, so we've got two sets this time, and huge thank you to Colin, especially for going back and reviewing the recording from the April 24th meeting to compile these. And I think David Plum did the June 21st minutes. So if anybody notices anything that's missing or incorrect, that would be welcome.
Correct.
Jared, where are the recordings stored for the meetings? I forget.
Sorry, go ahead, Colin.
They're linked in the calendar, kind of for calendar entry for that particular meeting. I don't think anybody has them anywhere else, like kind of compiled anywhere at this point.
If we were, I'm asking because if we wanted clarification on a particular point in the notes, and wanted to go back. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
My experience has been that you can find them by searching YouTube with the appropriate date and name.
Okay, great, thanks.
So are there any comments, corrections to these 2 minutes? Has everybody had adequate time to review them?
I've reviewed them.
All right, well, hearing no corrections, and I'll take that as the minutes are approved. I've been working with the Vermont Clean Heat Standard, and we have we're working under Robert's Rules of Order, so we have to have motions and seconds, and so
yeah,
it's nice to be in a more informal setting here again. All right, so I'm going to then just turn it over to you, Colin, I believe, or you're going to take up the public engagement issues or draft.
Sure.
I'll stop.
All right, thanks. And actually, maybe I will pull those up here. Hold on one second. Or, well, yeah, let me just pull them up. I did link those in the agenda as well. So, or I think they're in kind of through the link that Jared dropped in the chat at the beginning too. I don't know if everybody has read them. I did not have anything to do with the crafting of these, but believe these were from the Just Transition Subcommittee and then have been reviewed and kind of, there are some track changed edits from the Climate Council in there. And so it's not a completely final document yet. I think Sophie Veltrup from the Climate Action Office was going to work on kind of incorporating those, but hasn't done it yet. So that's why it says draft, is they're not totally final, but I don't expect them to change very much. But what they are, and I think I'll just give you all maybe 5 minutes to read through them all, and then if we want to have any discussions on it, we can do that. But essentially, it's kind of just as the name suggests, best practices for kind of incorporating public comments into the subcommittee business and meetings and the appropriate times to do that, so that kind of before, maybe after the presentation, but before deliberation and final decision making. And so there's just some details around that. So yeah, so maybe I'll just pause and pull that up and let everybody read through. Unless everybody has already read through them, I apologize. I sent them rather late last night, so totally understandable if you didn't get to it.
I did have a chance to look at them.
Oh, great.
Relatively short. So does anybody else want to take some time now to review before we ask if there's questions or comments? No.
Yeah, it was a short document, so I was also able to read it.
Okay.
So I guess are there any questions or comments? As I said,
I have two things that I like about this document that I will mention. One is the emphasis on making sure that when the department receives public comment on a topic related to our meetings, to make sure that the comments are distributed to all the members of the relevant subcommittee. I don't know that that has not been happening, but I've noticed it when it does happen, and it made me wonder whether there were other times when it didn't happen. So I just say, I think that's an important thing to be explicit about. The other thing is that perhaps on today's agenda, we can make sure that we encourage, and make a space for public comment before any actions that we are planning to take, and not afterwards.
Yep.
Makes sense.
Agreed. Thanks, Richard.
and I think today, I mean, this is typically you asking for public comment before a decision would mean a formal decision, but I think, yes, it would be appropriate after we talk about the work plan. That's where we have our public comment today to get any additional input.
We could also pause. I mean, the main decision was made at the last meeting, but there is a suggested revision to our recommendation on the social cost of greenhouse gases to go up to the council. So maybe we could adjust the agenda slightly to just pause to see if there is public comment after that's introduced and before we make a decision as a subcommittee.
Excellent point.
Question. How long are these meetings, these open meetings, intended to be?
Are you talking about the science and data meetings, or just in
these subcommittee meetings? I guess let me state a concern that I have about a couple of small points here. So during the meeting section, under the oral comment during the meeting, and 1, 2, 3, the fourth bullet point down, subcommittees are encouraged to respond directly to public comments. I'm just wondering what the focus and purpose of these meetings is intended to be. Is it intended purely to be receiving information to be digested by the subcommittee?
Mhm.
Or is it to be responding to various comments? It seems to me that the meeting could get bogged down, and perhaps bogged down badly, if it becomes if the "and" gets put in there. And that in meetings like this, in the past, it seems to me that there needs to be a response to the public, of course, but I'm not sure that the best time and place for that is during the meeting, that the meeting is a time to receive those comments, and that needs to be, I would suggest that needs to be made clear at the beginning of the meeting, and that full responses to those comments, both oral and written, and I'll come down to during the meeting under the written comment section, that written comments will be read out. Again, it seems to me that maybe those written comments should be posted someplace for people to be able to read, and then the subcommittee would respond in full to all oral and written comments in the document that gets posted for everyone to see. I'm trying to favor actually getting as much commentary as possible, pro and con, from the public during the meeting, as opposed to trying to justify a decision or set of decisions. It seems that it could bog down the meeting.
I think it's a really good point, Breck. And one of the things that it makes me think is that the proper way to respond to public comment really depends on what the public comment is. If it's something that is very kind of on point, relevant, germane to the conversation that's happening right then, and then that may make sense. There could be a question raised where, as you say, further information needs to be gathered before a response could even be delivered. And then, of course, there are sometimes we have meetings where public comment is not on the topic at hand. It's about an entirely different topic, and there could be a challenge of just getting, going off track from the meeting agenda and what we're trying to accomplish. So I agree, and I think it's a really well taken observation that oftentimes the response to public comment depends on the nature of the public comment. Catherine, I don't know if you see Claire's hand.
I can't.
Oh, Claire has her hand up.
Usually, yeah, Claire.
Claire, you're muted though.
Yeah.
Maybe it was an accidental hand. Oh,
Can you hear me now?
yes.
We can.
Oh, okay, weird. I unmuted on my phone, but it didn't transfer to Zoom. So, okay. Anyways, I was just going to say I agree with what Jared was saying, and I wanted to comment. I serve as staff support for Just Transitions and was involved in the drafting of this. And I think ultimately, at the end of the day, the intent is that people are feeling heard in the way they are participating in Climate Council and subcommittee processes. And so I think one of the things we talked about was, regardless of how you're commenting, that there is some transparency and accountability, whether that's like transparency that we only have this amount of time for public comment, but we really want to hear from the public, and we may not be able to respond to everyone, but we'll have a way to follow up. But I think this ultimately stemmed from hearing that people were feeling like they were trying to participate and not understanding how their comments were being taken in or processed or even like being responded to. So I totally agree that, it may depend on the given meeting or the context, but I think ultimately the transparency and accountability piece is really what matters the most.
Appreciate the clarification, Claire, as one of the authors. Sorry, I didn't see your hand. I figured out maybe it's because you're on the phone.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah.
Any other comments? All right. Well, I think these are for our use, your use as you move forward, and nice to have them in writing as guidance. So I assume, Colin, then you're going to be you'll be sharing with them the final version once that's complete.
Yeah, I can send that out when it gets finished.
Great. So the next item on our agenda is the memo on the social cost of greenhouse gas recommendations. So I'll turn that over to Jared.
Thanks, Catherine. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Do folks see a Word doc?
Yes.
Yes.
Great, thank you. So folks will remember, this is the recommendation that this subcommittee reviewed and approved ahead of the last Climate Council meeting. And we got some really good feedback, both from Dr. Dupini-Giroux, who is on the call, and from Secretary Moore, suggesting that we make it clearer, and Leslie, and please correct me if I don't phrase this correctly, but the way that I heard the recommendations was that we want to make a clearer link between what the how we assess what the social cost of greenhouse gases should be to the recommendations of the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. I'll just say the National Academies for short, recognizing that, so in this instance, the EPA did follow the National Academy's recommendations in terms of utilizing the best available science, and there were a number of ways that they updated the estimates for the social cost of greenhouse gases in line with the National Academy's recommendations. But I think there was an understanding that there could be a future scenario in which the EPA could put out estimates that might not follow the National Academy's recommendations. So there was a request that we more clearly establish the role of following the recommendations of the National Academies. And so I took a first shot at incorporating that feedback. You can see it here in track changes on pages 3, and I guess it goes on to the last page, but it would basically be this red part that would say, note that the social cost of greenhouse gas estimates that we are recommending for use for the Climate Council were developed in response to the National Academy's recommendation to incorporate the latest science. And then later, when we talk about the Science and Data Subcommittee continuing to track the literature around social cost of greenhouse gas estimates, and any updates that are released by the Federal Interagency Working Group that was led by EPA, that are in line with National Academy's recommendations, and making clear that what Vermont uses for the social cost of GHG should continue to be based on the National Academy's recommendations and the best available science. So pretty much was just making clear and centering the National Academies in a few key places in this language to make that abundantly clear. So want to first, not to put you on the spot, Leslie Ann, but if I'm especially curious if you feel like this is responsive to the request, and if not, if you have alternate suggestions, and then would also want to open it up to others who may have thoughts.
Thanks, Jared. And I think the wording as you've tweaked it there looks perfectly fine. I don't have anything to add in terms of changes. The only slight tweak would be a point of clarification, and it wasn't so much that EPA could be out of line with national academies. It was just going back to the original source. And so a lot of the consensus reports that are put out by the academies are for that purpose. And so the agencies, because they're all part of the federal government, followed that consensus thinking. So it was sort of like taking it one step back to the original source when we refer to it in our document. So I think everything is streamlined, so we don't have any problem correcting that. Just for the recording purposes, yeah, I just wanted to sort of clarify that just a bit.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
My apologies.
No, you're good.
Any other thoughts? So in that case, let's do, before we make a decision about approving this, why don't we take a moment for public input or public comment? Anybody in the public like to weigh in? Not seeing any hands. There is one phone number, which I'm assuming you can't raise your hand, so do speak up if you have anything you'd like to add here. All right, well, in that case, is there any objection? Let's take it from the negative. Any objection to adopting the changes, the edits that Jared has added to this document before it is forwarded to the council? I'm assuming, is that where it goes next?
Yeah, and just for a little additional context here, folks may remember that the council has adopted a process of not making a formal decision upon the first presentation of any recommendation. That it occurs over 2 meetings, and so the first presentation of this happened at the last council meeting. I can't remember the date of that. There was that suggested feedback from councilors Dupini-Giroux and Secretary Moore. And so I think now with those recommendations included, if that sounds good to Leslie Ann and to this subcommittee, I think the action is to have the Science and Data Subcommittee recommend or provide the council with these revised recommendations for their consideration at the September meeting, in which they would become formally adopted for guidance in the next climate action plan and any associated analysis. Catherine Breck has his hand up.
I'll just, I worked with Jared and Colin on the original revision of this, and I just want to speak to supporting these alterations, that the editorial changes that Jared has made. I think they clarify things and look good, so I would recommend to move it forward.
Thanks, Breck.
So do we need to take a formal vote as a committee? I think this is of sufficient import that I think going on record with a vote might be a good thing.
I have to say I've lost, having facilitated these subcommittees for a long time, I've forgotten your voting protocol. So thank you for that. Is that how you typically take a formal vote?
Yeah, and sometimes it has just been in the way that you've noted, Catherine, you know, if without objection, and just noting that it was if it is a unanimous recommendation of the subcommittee. If there is disagreement, we would note that. But oftentimes it has been sufficient to just note that, you know, it was if it is a consensus recommendation, to note that it's a consensus unanimous recommendation of the subcommittee. So I don't know. I mean, we've never really used Robert's rules, so we could like call for a motion in a second, or we could just do what you did and say, is there any objection to moving forward these recommendations on behalf of the subcommittee?
Why don't we go there for the latter? And so I'll just restate it again. We've had several affirmative endorsements, but I want to make sure that if there are any objections at any of the subcommittee members, that they are raised now. And if not, we will consider it a consensus adoption of the edits.
That's fine. That's responsive to my request. I just want to make sure that the minutes of the meeting, that somebody searching the minutes could easily find the action that the subcommittee took.
Okay. All right. And I'll be sure it gets reflected. I'm taking notes. I'm the one taking notes this time.
And just to note that there's several members of our subcommittee absent today, so I probably wouldn't use the word consensus. I'd maybe sort of make sure that it's the members present.
Mm-hmm.
Good clarification. I'll put that in. All right. Then I think the next item that we have on the agenda is to start moving into the work planning session. we have broken this into, actually Colin and Jared broke this down into a couple of different steps. And we thought the first step that would be useful is just getting everybody grounded in the overall update to the CAP timeline. And I think Jared, as a member of the steering committee, had been working on a document that reflects that larger timeline in which you're going to be fitting in your various tasks. So if you wouldn't mind sharing that, we'll take a look at that and just see if anybody has any questions about that before we move into the specifics of the science and data work.
Great. Let me just share this. I think we may have shared this before, so this may look familiar. Do folks see the Vermont Climate Council additional guidance for subcommittees?
Yes.
Great, thanks, Breck. So, this I think was primarily put together for the subcommittees that are going to be making multiple substantive recommendations into the climate action plan. The cross-sector mitigation, agricultural rural resilience subcommittees. But it's relevant for us as well. And what it tries to do is set out these stages of just what does it look like between now and next July of 2025 when the revised climate action plan is due. And so I actually find it helpful to go backwards. So the end of this year in December through the first 6 months of 2025 are really about consolidating the subcommittee recommendations into a single revised climate action plan, and about incorporating just transitions principles. I mean, that's an element throughout. There's incorporation of just transitions principles at every step in the process. Before that, kind of coming up soon this fall, September through November, is a lot of prioritization and refining of the recommendations from the different subcommittees. And we've kind of moved through this initial stage of June through September of deliberation, which happened after kind of the review of the grounding and getting started around the existing climate action plan, the Global Warming Solutions Act, getting alignment on that while there will be multiple recommendations in the climate action plan, we want to convey a sense of prioritization. There's talk of a top 10 list of main recommendations so that there's some way to pull out and focus on some of the most impactful and substantive recommendations, rather than just a list of 200 plus. So, for us, this may not be the most relevant document, but I think it is useful to have eyes on the timeline for the council as a whole and the other subcommittees as a whole, as we think about the two main ways that we will likely engage in this process. And I think that's twofold. One is the components of the climate action plan that this subcommittee has historically been responsible for. That's not to say that we couldn't that there might not be additional pieces of the revised CAP that this subcommittee may want to either lead or be involved with, but at least looking at the previous climate action plan, there were two main pieces, as I understand it, that this subcommittee led. One was the decision around the appropriate social cost of greenhouse gas estimates to use, and I think we're well on track to provide that clarity to inform the analysis that will happen in support of the CAP over the coming months. The other big piece, which is something that Leslie Ann led, was the drafting of a chapter around the scientific underpinning of the climate action plan, and that'll be a big focus of our work plan. But beyond those two pieces, my understanding is that there aren't a lot of other responsibilities for this subcommittee in terms of particular chapters or content in the climate action plan. Instead, the way that we've historically engaged, again, this doesn't have to be the way that we, solely do things going forward, but we've historically played a really robust role in providing review and feedback on contracted analysis that underpins the CAP, whether that's the pathways model, life cycle analysis, any type of science and data related research and analysis that supports the climate action plan. We've historically played a key role in helping review and develop that. So I think that those are probably the two big components as we look at this broader timeline that are at least starting points for our work plan. Our components of the climate action plan that we have a responsibility for, but then also laying out what is the review process look like for contracted analysis that's either underway or scheduled to begin. I hope that's helpful. Catherine or Colin, did I miss anything by way of context, or is there any additional questions from others?
I think you covered it.
That was great. And we may come back to this when we, after we've sort of completed thinking through your work plan and see if, we are in sync with, as not just the analysis, but making sure that the individual subcommittees and the council have the information that they need to be making decisions. So are we going to be on track? Great. Any questions? Okay, so the next step, and this is getting to the point that Jared made, that one of the significant pieces of content that you were responsible for in the last version and will be responsible for in the next version is the scientific underpinnings section. And Leslie Ann, I know you had a major responsibility for that. So certainly interested in hearing your input on one. I think there's sort of two questions here. One, what would be the major updates that are needed, and sort of if you can give us a sense of what you think is the level of effort needed, and then two, how we're actually going to try to get that done. Who would be responsible? Who would be able to actually do some of the drafting? So I'll turn it over to you just for some of that context.
Thanks, Catherine. I was just making a note here so I don't forget the two pieces. And I think in terms of the scientific underpinnings, we have some new information and data now that we are 2 or 3 years out from the last time we did this. And we can refer back to some of the new guidance, like the 5th National Climate Assessment, for example. I think one of the things that we didn't get to do a lot of last time, or a couple of things we didn't get to do a lot of last time, one of them has to do with economics. I don't think we did a lot in the health space, and I think we're missing a couple elements in terms of water, but writ large. And I'm not just talking about floods and droughts, water quality and some of those elements in there. And so I think for the next couple of weeks, what I probably will do is to do some deep dive into what are those buckets that we need to really beef up on, because we didn't have a chance to do them last time. I think our expertise around the subcommittee this time will help us with that. We may need to draw in some additional expertise. That would be okay in helping to sort of streamline a lot of those additional pieces. So those would be the parts that I think we can spend the next couple of weeks brainstorming and getting in line.
Great. So I guess the subsequent, anybody else who may have been thinking about this have any other comments or thoughts about what you think this update might require, or additional topics it might need to cover? Because I think our next question is, oh yes, go ahead, Breck.
Just my comment, I agree completely with everything Leslie just said about components that ought to be added. Another resource that comes to mind is that there was a table, and I can bring it up if you want, but there was a table that was in the EPA document that described what was included and what was not yet included in the social costs of greenhouse gas emissions. And I found that a quite valuable list. It was a very concise documentation of what was kind of missing, and we might look at that for ideas for things that need to be included. I could bring that table up quickly if people wanted to review.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Tara.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to appreciate what Leslie Ann you laid out in terms of some of the missing pieces, because at least in the professional engineering environment, climate kind of world that I'm living in, I'm hearing a lot about the cross section with the health professionals and how that's a missing link, especially on the heels of some of our recent floods and disasters, where people have been in their basements kind of cleaning out and end up with their health providers asking questions of how do I know that this is safe? How do I address the specific health concern that might have originated from responding to a climate related event? So it'll be great to see that engagement or that involvement highlighted in a way that we can really bring both professionals in, especially on the communication, and just given some of our vocabulary is very different across these professional practices. So trying to speak some sort of a common language and then doing the outreach and communication along those lines. So let the science take us where it takes us, and then finding ways to communicate that across professional sectors was something that it made me think of when you're talking about some of those gaps.
A great idea, Tara, and not to put David on the spot. David Grass is also on our subcommittee now, and David is with the Department of Health. David, not to put you on the spot, but if you had anything that you wanted to add, maybe?
I'm driving, so I'm going to be off camera, but no, I'll just say that I appreciate the opportunity for wholesome engagement this time around. Last time took place during pandemic when we were otherwise occupied, and looking forward to contributing however it's helpful. Thanks.
Thanks, David. And just to go back to what Tara just said about crosscuts, this might be another wonderful way of doing a crosscut, because David Alma, who used to be on our subcommittee, is also on the Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee now. So there's another way of doing some of that crosstalk in the crosswalk.
Given that you've identified what some of the key areas are for, welcome, we have a new member joining, Ken. So yeah, let me take the hands up before I move on. First, Richard. Still can't hear you. Try again.
This is somewhat of a change in topic from what Leslie Ann was talking about. I can wait. If that discussion isn't done yet, I can wait.
Yeah, why don't we hold then that comment? And Jared, did you want to continue on this point?
Yeah, I just pulled up and was looking at, and I'll actually share screen if that's okay. So this is the table of contents of the first climate action plan. And I think I was actually using a term in a way that I didn't mean to. So when I was talking about the scientific underpinning of the CAP, that brought me all the way to the, look at how linked that table of contents is. We jumped to that section. Sorry if I'm making anyone dizzy. But the scientific underpinning of the CAP, at least in terms of the old outline, was really the social cost of carbon. We would now say social cost of greenhouse gases, the inventory and supplemental accounting, and the carbon budget. What I had thought of as the scientific underpinning was actually titled climate change in Vermont, and was Leslie Ann, please correct my characterization of this. But I think it was primarily about how is Vermont's climate changing, or how has it changed, and what data do we have about that? Everything from rainfall to average temperatures, et cetera, and what are the current and expected effects of that, including the forecast for how things may change in the future. And I feel like, so first I just wanted to say, like, organizationally, I think we're probably talking about that climate change in Vermont section, but I also really agree with what Leslie Ann said, that this is an opportunity to say, what other just basic foundational pieces of really important, valuable information can we provide up front? And I like the idea of being able to break that into sections, not just how has Vermont's climate changed, how is it forecasted to change, but what do we know about what that means or has meant for health, for economics? And maybe if we can identify those components, it's an easier project to kind of break up in terms of lead or co-authors of subsections of that overall. I am hesitant to say scientific underpinning because that referred to a later section, but the basic context setting about what do we know about climate change in Vermont, and what data and analysis is relevant to setting that context for the whole climate action plan.
And I don't know if you put me on the spot, Jared, because my computer just popped off and I actually lost connectivity for like 50 seconds. So remind me of the exact question you want me to answer here.
So I don't know if I was specifically trying to, I didn't intend to put you on the spot with a question. I was just noting that I think I had remembered the structure of the first climate action plan, and that what I had been thinking of as the scientific underpinning of the CAP, that actually had, that was really about social cost of greenhouse gases, the greenhouse gas inventory, the carbon budget. But there was the other piece that I'd been thinking of as the scientific underpinning of the CAP, but was actually titled Climate Change in Vermont. And I was just agreeing with your comment, Leslie Ann, that I think that now we have an opportunity to say, what else should be in that section beyond just what do we know about climate change that has happened, that is forecasted to happen, and then to say, what do we also know about how that impacts health, the economy, et cetera. And that if we think about a more holistic or comprehensive treatment about that kind of lay of the land of context setting scientific information that should lead off the climate action plan, that we could probably break that into sections where we have different lead or co-authors to make it a more manageable task. So I was really just agreeing with your suggestion that there's an opportunity to add more information up front to that kind of climate change in Vermont section.
Right. And I think what happened last time was it got written towards the end because of the timing of when things were coming out. And so ideally, all of those, you can call them scientific underpinnings, you can call it background, you can call it whatever else, that the other pieces build off of could be in place ahead of time. Because I think what happened was some of the things that were being referred to in the other subcommittees didn't all sort of drive. So there wasn't that sort of seamless meshing. And so that's what we should be heading for this time around, to have like one core story from a science perspective, and then everything sort of builds on that and refers back to that, instead of like, but why do you say this here and something completely different across here? Let's get that in place first, so that everything then sort of works together.
Well, that speaks to sort of what, if we were going to try to put some timeframes on that you would like to presumably to see this completed before the end of the year, obviously, so that other committees that are prioritizing or drafting at that point have it in hand and have it as a reference. To Jared's suggestion, I guess I'm wondering, Jared, are you thinking that we should take the time now to try to come up with some subheadings or subsections? Or would you like to sort of hand that off?
if there's time in the agenda, I think it could make sense to do an initial brainstorm of the main headers of those sections that we'd want to cover. The other option, and they're not mutually exclusive, we could also, I think there's a decision to be made about, do we want to set up a task group to dig into this? I mean, really grateful to you, Leslie, and for saying, like, let's take a couple of weeks, refamiliarize ourselves, with what was in the initial cap versus all of the additional information that's come out since that's more up to date, and then think about how we want to structure what this subcommittee contributes to the revised cap. And I'm just wondering, like, I mean, part of it the structure of how we go about that may depend on how many people want to be involved, and that may depend on how we build out what we cover. So it could end up being a task group. It could just be the working session of this subcommittee if there's enough components of that initial part of the cap that there's enough members of this subcommittee who want to contribute to that.
And for me, from an equity perspective, because we're missing so many people who would probably be really germane to this, I would err on the side of not doing it like fully and then having to revisit it and then having left out all of those important voices, including voices that are just driving right now and may not have the capacity to sort of actually contribute as much as they would have if they, fully present with their hands on the wheel and so on. So I would say, if you wanted to throw out a couple topics now, but I think I would love to have the other subcommittee members also be able to fully weigh in to do this well.
I think this might be where I would like to interject something.
Yeah,
If that's
please do.
okay. This has to do with the big picture of what this subcommittee is doing. So I only know what I read in the newspaper. I don't know anything beyond what I read in the newspaper. The newspaper says that Vermont Conservation Voters has indicated an intent to sue ANR on grounds, in part, that ANR is being too optimistic about our progress to date and our future progress on reducing greenhouse gases. That's what I know. I mean, this is what I read in the paper. So then I read that Secretary Moore has said that she thinks the criticisms are groundless, that it's all okay. So my question is there a role for this subcommittee in reviewing those parts of our plan about which questions have been raised by outside parties? Is that one way that we might prioritize our work? Is at least in part to assess the claims that are being made in the VCV lawsuit.
Just one friendly clarification. My understanding is that it's not VCV, it is Conservation Law Foundation, CLF.
Yes, the foundation.
And that it's not a suit, it was a notice of alleged violation.
My understanding was that it was a notice of intent to file a suit.
My understanding is that it was a notice of alleged violation that ANR has to respond to, and depending on that response, it could go in different directions, is my understanding. Same news reporting that you're reading, but just so that nobody's surprised about an organization that, to my understanding, is not involved.
That's fine. Thank you for clarifying. ANR can defend itself. They don't need me. But if ANR would benefit from a review by its scientific advisors of the merits of the claims, we might be in a position to do that.
Catherine, Ken has his hand up.
Yeah, Ken.
Yeah, I think Richard brings up a good point. Many of the documents that supported the climate action plan happened at the very end And I don't know, I can go back and look at the minutes to determine the extent to which this body, the review took place, and to the extent it took place, whether those comments were incorporated. Because yes, some of the information that Secretary Moore used to come to her conclusion, there were several comments that I think, well, there were several comments about some weaknesses in that analysis. But again, a lot of it took place kind of after the fact with regards to the climate action plan. So I guess I'll reiterate Richard's question. Do we have a role? And I apologize for being late. Maybe some of this was being discussed, but some of the analysis that led to the first plan, should we be revisiting that analysis to determine where the flaws are in part, but also perhaps some emphasis on where additional work would really help the next plan. And I'll tell you right now, my strong sentiment is economic analysis. There was not sufficient economic analysis in the first plan. There was that bottom line, net benefit to the economy, but I'm sorry, that just doesn't help with the implementation of programs where you need to understand program costs and who's paying and who's receiving the benefits. And as we move forward, and I'm hoping the next plan includes additional actions, we have a much better understanding of the economic impacts of those actions. But starting with some of the early work to review that. So yeah, I'll reiterate Richard's question.
What's the reaction of the other members? I don't know how this typically would the climate office come to the Science and Data Committee and ask for your help, or you can take that initiative on your own?
I think that to date, there's certainly a disagreement around the appropriate data to use for future forecasts. And I think that much of that discussion has happened actually in the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee, because that's the subcommittee that Brian Woods participates in and has given a couple of presentations there on the pathways model, and that has not really come here. Folks may know I've done an independent review and raised some very serious questions and concerns about that, but I think it's a really fair question about if this subcommittee wants to be part of that review. I think it's a really fair question because it is about the underpinning of the data of where we stand and where we're legally required to go, and questions of being on track or not. But I just want to say that these conversations have come up a bit in the cross-sector committee. They came up in January at the full Climate Council meeting, but that's just some background context.
Yeah, Catherine, I think it's important that this group decide on its own whether or not it wants to undertake that, or whatever the work scope is, if it wants to undertake that assignment or other assignments, Ken's recommendation on economic. I don't think it's really appropriate for the Climate Action Office to be saying or asking this group, or appearing to even direct this group to do one thing or another.
Understood. I don't know if this rises to the level of a decision that needs to be made in the moment, but it sounds like at least a couple of you are interested in adding this as another potential task. That was an item we're going to get to at the end of our work planning, but I'll take note of that. And I think to the extent that there are individuals who want to sign up for that as part of their commitment, I think that's the other thing we're looking for, is volunteers for task groups that are willing to take on specific tasks. So
to the extent that I have expertise that's relevant for this committee, I mean, I have two areas of expertise. One is as an epidemiologist, but the other is because I've had some experience trying to put together greenhouse gas inventories. I'm at least somewhat familiar with that domain. And so far, in the 3 years that I've been on this subcommittee, nobody's asked my opinion about any of that work, even though I think I might have something to offer. So I'm just offering once again, if it would be useful to have some additional eyes look at the foundations of the plan, maybe this committee can offer something, this subcommittee.
Okay, I think I've got that in as an item that we will add to the overall list of tasks. And I think in terms of timing, Jerry, getting back to your, do we have time to really dig into how we want to divide up the sections of the chapter Leslie Ann had been responsible for in the past? And given Leslie Ann's comments, I'm going to just suggest that maybe we hold off on that for now. But one of the things that I opened up with is definitely the idea of this shouldn't all fall on one individual. I think it fell on only a couple of individuals last time. So to the extent that people are interested in taking up specific sections as they get identified, that will be kind of the next step in making sure that we have enough people committed to helping out. So I will just put sort of as the next step in the notes, and certainly welcome your clarification, but that there will be an effort. And I don't know if this ends up falling on you, Leslie Ann, as the first step, just to identify sort of a general outline of what needs to be addressed in the updated section. Would that be appropriate? And then bring that back to the group and have them, the rest of the group, both help you refine that as well as step up into the roles of taking on different sections. That makes sense?
Yep. So just to do a friendly tweak on that, I think from what I'm hearing is there are two moving pieces at play right here. And if I look at some of the other climate action plans from other states and so forth, there's the science piece that has to do with, the science and the let's call it the entire Earth system piece, biodiversity and all that sort of stuff, which is different from some of the pieces that I'm hearing in terms of making sure that some of the impacts of some of the other pieces are also revisited, clarified, updated, corrected. And so there may be two parallel tracks going on in here. And I think from a science perspective, having the correct science, again, or system-wise, that the other subcommittees are building and basing their pieces on is foundational. And as equally important as going back and making sure that the analyses that are being run from an economic perspective, from an energy perspective, and so on, are also in place. So I'm going to suggest that we have two of these tracks and have clarification around each of those.
Okay.
For example, I can see, and I'm going to put Tara on the spot. Tara does a lot of natural hazards, so she might be interested in doing some of that science content. Brex traditionally did a lot of water quality, so he might be interested in that. David Grass does a lot of health, so he might be interested in that. Jay Schaefer is a meteorologist. So there's a non-overlap with that piece. And I think that's the part that I'm most interested in, because it's what's going to drive a lot of the what is it that we're doing about climate change pieces.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Leslie Ann, I am willing to help out. I'm happy to help out as you indicated.
Yeah, likewise. I really appreciate this distinction, Leslie Ann, that you just made, because I think I was trying to wrap my head around how some of the gaps from the previous report fit in the way Richard and Ken were mentioning, and trying to figure out how I may or may not be able to contribute to that piece. But I think the way you laid out the differences, yeah, I'm on board to help you in whatever capacity once you have that outline. Thanks.
Thanks, Breck. Thanks, Tara.
I don't want to put too much on you, so I just want to ask if it is appropriate, or if you're willing and have the time to come back with just the outline of the updated chapter as a starting place for the rest of the group. Yes, she said yes. Great, thanks. Okay, so let's move then to the next item, which is actually, let me look here. So the big piece of your work is going to be, as Jared laid out earlier, is going to be reviewing the analysis of different contractors that are already have ongoing work, or at least are about to kick off some ongoing work. So Colin put together a table to show you what is currently in place and about to be finalized, just to get us thinking about what are those ongoing analysis, what are the specific deliverables for them, and where is it that, so that everybody can have a sense of where it is that the science and data can plug into that. So Colin, why don't you go ahead and share your screen with that document? I don't think it was shared with the agenda. I guess it was shared with the agenda. Everybody did get it in advance, sorry.
That's fine. Do you want to share it, or shall I pull it up here?
I'd really appreciate it if you could, so I'm taking notes. Don't.
Okay, sure. Just give me 1 second here. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yes.
All right. So as Catherine mentioned, this was sent out as a link in the agenda. We'll just download an Excel workbook for you. But these are the kind of 3 contracts that are either in the works or kind of in process, and at some point in the process at this point, through the Climate Action Office. And so I'm going to talk about the first one, which is the Measuring and Assessing Progress tool, or the MAP tool. I think Jared is going to touch on the Cap and Invest, or I know Brian Woods is on as well, and he can speak briefly to either Cap and Invest or potentially the SEI Pathways one. But let me start with the MAP tool. So that project is just kicking off now, and the kickoff meeting is actually on August 19th. So we're in the very early phases, but I think I've gone over kind of what this tool is before, but I'll at least highlight very quickly again. It's essentially it's going to end up being a dashboard. Phase 1 is just kind of putting together kind of the background and data and sources for the dashboard in phase 2. But phase 1 kind of consists of contractor reviewing frameworks, and I'll move over here because I wrote some of these out from the contract. But our contractor is Eastern Research Group, or ERG, and so they will be kind of reviewing different kind of data tool frameworks that might be helpful for this, as well as identifying a data governance team who will have, the thought being that will have kind of expertise both in kind of available data and data sets, as well as kind of some of the more systems approach, like how you would actually kind of store and utilize that data, and also coming up with a data governance plan. And maybe I'll back up a little bit more just to say that this tool is we're planning to have this tool kind of capture a whole host of different metrics related to climate change in Vermont. Everything from mitigation to adaptation, resilience, equity, and public engagement. So the vision is for it to be a very kind of sweeping and holistic picture of these different indicators that are either impact or impacted by climate change in Vermont. And so kind of jumping back ahead, the first part is for kind of putting together that data governance team and reviewing the frameworks. The second part will be to develop kind of logic models and use cases, and to kind of map out how all these different metrics and kind of the end scenario are related, and through doing that to determine what metrics are going to be the most important for us to track, and what data sources might be available for that. The next phase is kind of actually mapping out and contacting entities, organizations that might have that data, or agencies, figuring out how exactly to fill all those kind of data needs identified for the different metrics, and to also kind of have the contractor make a recommendation for not to build, but kind of what the kind of tool dashboard will look like. So obviously a few different steps, and like I mentioned, we're just getting started, but that's kind of the layout of where different kind of spaces where we could have science and data members plug into this process. And I think the idea when talking to Jared and Catherine was maybe we would have kind of a list of interested subcommittee members who would just kind of be on this team and then could participate in the review of various deliverables through this process. But if it didn't feel like a particular piece was in their wheelhouse or something they wanted to review, that they wouldn't necessarily have to do everything. So maybe I'll stop there and see if there are any questions. I see, Ken, you've got your hand up, so go ahead.
Yeah, I'm wondering is the measuring and assessment progress tool going to be instrumental in reporting results in terms of the Global Warming Solutions Act? And there's a corollary to this. Had my meeting yesterday with the Public Utility Commission technical advisory group, and they also need this kind of product because as they establish targets and targets for establishing credits to determine the success of that target setting, or the utilization of those targets in terms of meeting the thermal sector portion of Global Warming Solutions Act progress. So is this product going to be doing that?
I'm not sure. So it will have kind of metrics related to mitigation that would be useful in determining part of that, like things like EVs adopted or registered and heat pumps deployed and buildings weatherized, assuming that we can get all that data. And some of it I know we can, and other pieces I'm not quite as confident in at this point. But so it will have that. What it will not have is any kind of an emissions calculation associated with that. So it will not try to calculate the emissions reductions associated with adopting or installing 2,000 heat pumps. And that, frankly, is because that's not really how the greenhouse gas inventory works. And so you could do that calculation in the map tool, but it would not align to the emissions in the greenhouse gas inventory because it's a different way of calculating. And so it could be useful, but it would be a much kind of a larger calculation effort. And this tool is more meant to kind of show progress through, or assess progress through these specific metrics and indices that we know are important indicators, rather than trying to quantify the actual emissions reductions. Does that answer your question?
It does, but I'll be honest, in a very unfortunate way. I mean, because somebody does need to make that relationship between the progress in taking the actions and its impact on ultimately what we're being held accountable for. So yeah, that we have to do that. And the we, I mean, whether it's, you know, the technical advisory group of the Public Utility Commission, or I guess I will throw it back, you know, and this kind of leads to the lawsuit piece. How does ANR and the Climate Action Office intend to report their progress towards meeting the targets in they're meeting the requirements of the Global Warming Solutions Act?
I don't have a good answer for that. But I guess, and yeah, but I guess I will say that, I mean, the inventory is really the final indicator of whether or not we have reached those targets. And so I don't know what a good answer is, because it's a different framework. So I totally appreciate what you're saying, and I agree, but it's just kind of it's a strange disconnect to try to deal with, where, I mean, you could have the example that I use sometimes, and there are ways to correct for this, certainly, but like, you could adopt 5,000 heat pumps and have your emissions go up in the RCI sector if you had a cold winter. And so, like, you could calculate, if you calculated in the map tool, that 5,000 heat pumps would get you X emissions reductions. And so you would expect to see the RCI sector go down in the inventory, but it wouldn't. And it's that kind of disconnect that just makes it really difficult. And obviously, there's always going to be some level of uncertainty. And I do take your point. I really do appreciate that. But I just don't think it's a super easy question to answer.
Yeah, and I hope to participate on August 19th, because that is actually the role of the logic model. The logic model is to identify the factors which influence the outcomes, and the extent to which you can measure those factors that should inform your progress. And yes, you're right. Sometimes there are things that you didn't include in the logic model, which means you should include them. And sometimes you may not have the data. But in terms of, you know, what you just laid out, certainly an important factor in the thermal sector is heating degree days. So that should be included in the logic model, so that, because we again, the we is undefined, we have to know when we're making progress, the extent to which our programs are contributing to that progress, and when we're not making progress, the extent to which we need to modify the programs. That, to me, is the role of the Climate Action Plan. And, you know, the subset that I'm participating in now, the role of the Clean Heat Standard, really needs to understand how the actions that it is measuring and providing credits for is contributing to a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. So we have to do it. And so, I mean, I will push, I'll tell you right now, on August 19th, that this tool is a strong part of our understanding of meeting those targets, because if not this, then what? And just knowing that we didn't make the target is inadequate, and will be inadequate in terms of a lawsuit. You have to be able to describe the actions you took, your understanding of how those actions were going to contribute to meeting the target. So I don't need to take more time, but I'm going to be pushing that, no question. That's what a performance measurement system is supposed to do.
Richard's also asking how to participate in the August 19th meeting. I see an August 17th date. What is the 19th meeting? I may have missed that.
The August 19th is the kickoff meeting, but as of right now, that is kind of just the state, a few of the state team and our contractor. I can ask about seeing if members of Science and Data can come to that, or potentially we can schedule a follow-up meeting to that. I'm not sure what the reception will be, because we haven't even met with the contractor yet. So it may be that we could schedule another meeting shortly after that one. That could be with members of science and data, but I can't promise anything at this point for that. I will investigate.
I think I would suggest that regardless of whether it's joining the kickoff meeting or whether it's, engaging at a future date when there's material to review and provide input on in terms of, the logic framework, et cetera, it'd be good to just pause now and see which members of the subcommittee are willing and interested to play some type of role in that project. It looks like Richard and Ken have already volunteered. I would also be happy to, but want to make sure that we create the space to see if there's others for whom this overall project, as you've described it, Colin, they'd want to help contribute to in a review and input capacity.
I was a member of a team that was following this work for a while, and either that team disbanded or I got dropped off the mailing list at some point.
Yeah, there was an initial group that was reviewing the initial request for proposals, and I think that just took a very long time through the kind of business office, right, Colin? And so there just wasn't much to do for a long time.
And Breck, your hand was up. Or is that a volunteering hand or a question hand?
No, it was as a relatively new member of this subcommittee. I just want to be sure that I'm clear about this. The MAP tool, this measuring and assessment progress, phase one is the creation of a tool to help track progress related to climate change in Vermont. Is this the tracking objectives tool that is in the initial climate assessment? Is this the same thing as the policy decision support tool that's being described? And I'm asking the question because I'm kind of agreeing with Ken that whatever we're investing in needs, we don't have unlimited funds and can't go in 5 different directions. So is this actually getting us towards an assessment that is needed to meet requirements?
I would have to go back and look at the specific language, but the way that the contract and the RFP was designed, it was not to calculate emissions. It was to track those kind of meaningful indicators and metrics that would impact emissions, but not to make that correlation between the greenhouse gas inventory estimates on which the Global Warming Solutions Act targets or requirements are based, and kind of this much more real-time, very specific and granular data.
Colin, I get that distinction. Just first, a simple question. Where are those indicators listed?
We haven't come up with them yet.
Okay, so is that
part
what
of the process?
That's part of what this MAP initiative is supposed to do, is to develop those indicators?
Right.
Well, I guess at the very least, somewhere in the next plan, I see these as being related initiatives. They both seem important. They seem related. I agree with Ken that they need to be connected at some point by somebody. I don't know what that point is, and I don't know what that body is, but at the very least in the next report, some explanation of what those initiatives are and what the intention is for connecting them or not would be helpful in letting people know how things are moving forward.
Yeah, thanks, Breck. Claire, you had your hand up and it went down. I want to make sure if you have something, you can get back in.
Yeah, sorry, I was just saying I would be interested, and I put a note in the chat as well. And I'll just, while I'm speaking anyways, I do think I would recognize, I think we had some of this conversation when the first climate action plan was being developed, and we had the task group that fed into the scoping of the current contract. And there was an acknowledgement that ultimately it's the greenhouse gas inventory that, as Colin said, identifies where we are, and the challenge is that it just lags behind where a tool as Colin's been discussing can provide a more real-time kind of, or potentially more updated assessment of how at least we're doing in tracking CAP strategies and programs and things like that. So I agree that it's a challenge, but I want to flag that I think some of this was recognized and went into the original scoping document that led into the contract that is now taking off.
So we have Richard, Ken, Jared, and Claire as volunteers. And Collins at least offered to find out if you can join the kickoff meeting or if there'll be a way for you to have some input early on in the process as they're gearing up in their scope of work.
Yeah, Catherine, I would also like to be involved with this discussion. I don't think I can make the August 19th kickoff, even if Colin, you got permission or found a way to sneak us in. But I think just having some research in metrics and performance indicators with some of the resilient infrastructure systems, I feel like it'll be good to see the process that this contractor uses to kind of set up the tool. And yeah, I think I'm just interested. So it'll be great to be a part of the review team.
Hey, I will add your name. Well, that's great. That's it's a great group. And we'll wait to hear from Colin as to when you will first have an opportunity to get together, either with the contractor or with Colin. All right, let's move to the next one. And I think Cap and Invest is both, I don't know, Brian and Jared. One of you want to?
Yeah, I think this can be fairly quick because, you know, this is underway. Brian can provide more details about this, but the actual review team was kind of established in statute, kind of in, you know, so it clearly involves A&R, VTrans, the Treasurer's Office, and then there were 3 council member positions that were named as part of the review process. So I think this one is less about seeking additional folks to volunteer for review, because I think that is already set and it's already in progress, but more to be on this list so that people know that this research and analysis is underway and that there will be an opportunity for certainly the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee, for whom this is really relevant, and probably also this subcommittee to when there is a public draft or you know, public materials ready, but the kind of review process is underway and that team has already been established. Brian, is there anything that makes sense to add there?
Just for those that aren't familiar with what's going on is, yeah, as Jared said, this was in the transportation bill this passed this year, the requirement to do this study. So I'm actually assigned to VTrans, but the Climate Action Office is funding the effort, and we're going to study, as it says in C4 there, the effects of Vermont's participation in the multi-jurisdiction Cap and Invest program. And that would be either participation in the Western Climate Initiative that's currently composed of California and Quebec, or a prospective participation with the New York Cap and Invest program, which hasn't launched yet, but is under development. And the sectors that we're going to be looking at are the transportation sector only, and that is in recognition that the Clean Heat Standard is the policy set that is aimed at the residential, commercial, and industrial emission sector, and that the Transportation Climate Initiative didn't launch, and so we were looking to see what a policy would be for the transportation sector in order to be able to reduce our emissions. And then we also want to look at scenarios where we cover more sectors of the economy, both the ongoing WCI, Quebec and California programs, and the New York Cap and Invest program, or economy-wide programs. So managing emissions from all sectors with one program. And so we want to see if we're participating in transportation plus other sectors, including like the thermal sector, potentially the industrial sector. How would that affect the, our reduction target emissions and, strategies that we could pursue with revenue that we would realize from participating in these projects in order to be able to accelerate our decarbonization and achieve the Global Warming Solutions Act targets. I can stop there.
Well, let's see if there's any questions.
Let's see if there's any questions.
I don't know if you want to scroll over just to show the general timeline, Colin, what this looks like. So we go out as far as.
Yeah, this goes into early next year. So
Yeah,
there'll be a study of several scenarios, and then there'll be one scenario that's going to be reviewed in more detail. The contractors, Cambridge Systematics, and they're subcontracting with Resources for the Future for some of the macroeconomic effects analysis. And then they also are, part of this is a public engagement component. So it's FHI Studio is the contractor that's going to be doing some public outreach and focus groups in support of this work as well.
All right. Any questions? If not, let's take on the third one. Which
Yeah,
is,
sure. Jared, do you mind if I go ahead?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. So you may or may not know that SEI, that's the Stockholm Environment Institute, was a subcontractor to Energy Futures Group, and that's the group that did both the Pathways 2.0 analysis that was in support of the original Climate Action Plan, and they were also the prime contractor for the buildings and thermal energy analysis that was completed late last year. So what the Climate Action Office we're in the process of doing is engaging directly with SEI. Then they are the developer of the low analysis emissions platform, that's also known as LEAP, that the Vermont Pathways model is based on. And we want to contract with them directly to do basically 4 things. We want them to provide user support to the state agency users, both at the Climate Action Office and over in PSD, for folks that are have been using and are going to be continuing to use the Vermont Pathways model in the LEAP platform. Things like producing information or output. If there's problems or troubleshooting with the model, we want to be able to call on them to do that. There's also been an update to the version of the LEAP model. Actually, there have been several minor updates, and then they just released a major update to the LEAP platform. And we want to talk to them about migrating some of the earlier Pathways versions to the new model. They're not 100% compatible. So technical assistance with just managing the versions of the model that we have now, and to be able to support our work with particular tasks that we might have between now and this is actually a 4-year contract, so for the next 4 years. We also are going to have them update the baseline scenario. It was updated last in support of the buildings and thermal energy contract, but of course we have additional information on what emissions have occurred since they configured that model in support of that analysis. And there are also updated forecasts on all the kinds of things that are going to affect our emissions profile. So we're going to work with SEI on developing an update for that baseline scenario. We also are going to have them available at some level to be able to either update existing mitigation scenarios. Again, for folks that were familiar with it, Pathways 2.0 report that supported the initial Climate Action Plan, they featured what they call a cap mitigation scenario that showed a pathway to achieving both the 2025, which are calendar year 2024, and 2030, which is calendar year 2029, emissions reductions. That's, things have changed since then. Like I said, we're going to have this updated baseline. So we could look at that cat mitigation scenario and see, what would be changed in there based upon updated information to see what new trajectories would be. Also, we have the potential to look at different mitigation scenarios that would achieve the same targets or other targets as we decide. And it's just basically what is the mix of reduction measures that could be put together that would be add up to the emission reduction target that you're looking to achieve.
Thanks.
And then finally, we're going to have them just available for other activities as assigned for analysis that might come up that we haven't identified yet. All this is going to be like the baseline, and the scenario work would be under work orders that would take place under the contract. So we would scope out the work with SEI once we have them under contract, and then that would be a discrete task. The user support task is going to be like an on-call method, so it would be basically on a time basis for us. The contracting is complicated in part because this is an IT contract, and there's extra state level review that's required for any IT contracts and provisions. So we're working through that process, but we are making progress, and I am optimistic that we will be able to have the contractor on board, maybe not by the end of this month, but hopefully by the end of September. Associated with that, we are also procuring another 4-year extension of our existing licenses for the LEAP platform. I think that's going to, actually, I know that that's going to happen sooner than next month. That'll happen sometime this month as well.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I want to note that I have been delinquent in tracking our time. We're already over time.
Okay, just one thing to mention in the in column D, the review task group, I did provide this update to cross-sector mitigation, and Jared, along with Rich Cowart and Melissa Bailey from Public Service Department, have indicated an interest in reviewing particularly the baseline and then the scenario work. So I don't know exactly what the process is going to be for that yet. Again, I've been spending a lot of time with just the contracting issues. But once we get that wrapped up, then we can start to have a conversation about how the process for engagement will actually work.
Yeah, thank you. I would say the same, that it seems premature at this point to ask for more volunteers until we have a little more information about how this is going to be scoped out fully and the timeline.
Particularly the timeline. We have a good idea of what we're going to do, but when it actually starts is dependent on the contracting process, and that's a little bit, entirely out of our control.
Right.
I would suggest that I do think, especially since we're over, but while we're on this, I think it would be good to just capture any interest that exists on this subcommittee, as we did with cross-sector, if there are folks who would like to be part of the review process, so we don't miss that information, recognizing that the logistics of when and frequency, still to be determined, but let's at least get those names. So Ken, is that a interest in?
Yep.
Great.
Anyone else? We're starting to lose people. That's what I'm a little worried about.
This is Claire. I'll probably touch base with Melissa, but probably makes sense to include me since I was involved in the last work with it on the PSD side. So it'd be helpful to stay in the loop.
Great, thank you. Okay, I am going to sort of ask for the guidance of Colin and Jared in terms of, we need to have at least a moment for public comment at the end. We haven't had any major decisions since our last one, but we had also noted that we wanted to add any additional topics. We've got one already noted that we talked about earlier. Jared, how urgent is it for us to talk about the list of resources? Can that be deferred for the next meeting?
Yep.
Okay.
We can keep working on that in the meantime and send it out in advance, I think, if that works for Colin.
Okay. Then let me just pause and see, is there anyone from the public that wants to add anything at this point before we close the meeting? All right, and let me ask one more time, because it feels like the more important remaining topic was if there is anything else that, now that you've reviewed what these contractors are responsible for, if there's anything else that you feel would be helpful in the updating of the cap that would benefit from some analysis, given the one that we already have identified, you're sort of looking at the foundational analysis. Anything else that's occurred to you that we should at least take note of today? This doesn't close the door, but it'd be good to give you a chance if something popped into mind.
And is that a new?
Yeah, I think the issue with the range of biofuels needs to be addressed as objectively as possible. I don't know how the other groups are working on this, but it's definitely showing up in the clean heat standard world. And yeah, so if you want me to, I can maybe try to frame that a little bit more, but that topic about how we may be relying on lower carbon renewable fuels to meet our targets, it raises all sorts of controversy, and it would be great if we had an objective description. And I'll just use the single example, the clean fuel standard in California. They're now up to 75% of the diesel fuel sold in California is a renewable product.
Okay, I will note that as well as an additional topic, and it sounds like it needs to be fleshed out a little more in terms of what you would think the Science and Data Committee could do with that.
Yeah.
What input they would have. Okay. Well, I'll put that back on you then, if you can bring forward a little more thought on that.
And then before we close, Catherine, just two things. One, I just want to make sure David, who I don't know if he's still able on, but he'd put a note about expressing interest in the state of the science section regarding human health impacts. And I just wanted to make sure that that note from the chat got captured in the notes for the meeting, that volunteering. Awesome. And then I also, Colin, correct me if I'm wrong, but I just want to pause on this question of our next meeting. I'm not seeing one on the calendar, and I just think it would probably be good to pause on it before we leave in terms of what we're thinking or how we're gonna, if there isn't one, what the expected process is for setting the next one.
Yes, let me look. I believe it was for September 3rd. It's a Tuesday from 1:30 to 3. I don't believe that I put it on the Climate Council calendar, and I think something might have gotten a little bit screwed up when I put them into Outlook, because I know, Breck, you sent me a note on that, and then I couldn't find kind of the date that you had sent me in the actual meeting, and then they didn't end up being recurring. So I'm going to need to set them again as recurring anyway. But hopefully hopefully that next one is on there for beginning of September for you all.
I'll just note, if I'm the only one, that's fine, and it can go on without me. I will not be available that day. I imagine other people might have challenges since it's the day after Labor Day. So I think it's worth pausing to see if that is the case, and if so, whether we might want to change that.
I'm unavailable on 9/3 as well.
And that is fine by me.
You have some folks that aren't here. I don't know what your procedure is. Is it worth just taking a poll on availability for this one meeting?
Claire said in the chat that she'd also likely have to miss that. I mean, the background here is Colin did a really great poll that was kind of like, what are the general times that work? But but that may be subject to change with the academic calendar beginning to start. Historically, though, it's either been on a Friday like this or Tuesday or Wednesday afternoon, Colin.
I mean, it'd be nice if we shifted it by a week because I'll be in meetings from 1 to 9 p.m. that day.
Yeah, I could move it till the next week. Does that work for folks?
Tuesday, the next week?
Tuesday the 10th.
Yes, Tuesday the 10th.
Yeah, I'm away for a 2-week period, but I mean, there's.
Was that the? Hold on a second. I'm just going to double check here. If it works for most people, I might miss that one.
Friday better?
Maybe we could, the 13th.
We could do that. I think part of the problem with the scheduling originally was for this time, there were at least 4 or 5 people who couldn't make it, like who specified that they couldn't make it. And then that was also true for the Tuesday time. So there was not a great time for everybody at all. So I can move it to Friday, but we will likely be missing a similar subset of the people that we were missing today.
Do we have a quorum today?
We did.
Okay, good.
I wonder if it's worth just doing a poll for those 2 options for this meeting, the 10th or the 13th.
Okay, sure.
Colin, I do appreciate you laying out all of those dates through the year. That was, I mean, it's helpful to be able to put those on the calendar going out. It's just like you say, there's going to be folks who just aren't able to come to a particular meeting or whatever.
Sure, no problem, Brett.
Okay.
So I will send out a poll for those 2 options, probably for the whole days of those 2 options and see what we get back.
Cool.
Great. Thanks all. I think, sorry to hold you longer than expected, but appreciate those that were able to stick around. And so we will have a good weekend. We're there. Just about.
Enjoy. Be safe and be dry, everybody.
Thanks,
Yeah.
everyone.
We're getting Debbie now, so I hear it's heading your way.
Yep.
All right. So long.
Thanks. Bye.